Hey, RJ here from The People Have Spoken, and this is their news review. Today is December 2nd, and in this video, I'm going to be going over all the articles that I shared on the People Have Spoken Facebook page, giving you my thoughts and my commentary to try and provide some more context to all these things that are going on. Now, with no further ado, let's jump into the first story. So, the very first story, and this is from KelloLand.com, Governor Noem issues executive order to extend hay hauling. The time frame has been extended into February 2022 and can continue to move hay from 2 hours before sunrise and 2 hours after sunrise. Now, this is a very small story, and I don't want to spend too much time on it. I just had no idea that there are regulations about when you can go and move hay. Now, I don't know much about the context of this and why there are these regulations. I'm sure there's some very good reasons for this. Maybe it's that the hay spreads stuff all over the place and there's some other safety factors involved. But the fact that the government is out there still trying to say when you can and cannot move hay is bizarre to me. And it's just another example of how much bureaucracy and how much regulations are out there on small things that you may not even be aware of. So I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing or how this all plays out, but even just the fact that there's regulations on this, I found really surprising and something I didn't even know about. But moving on, the next story, and this one is from the Sioux City Journal. Other voice, South Dakota teacher pay and COVID money. And now this is an opinion piece, but I'll read the piece, the quoted text I have. South Dakota has been dwelling near the bottom of this list for decades, and it's a list of lowest pay for teachers, until the state approved a special one-time increase 4 years ago and finally allowed those wages to be lifted a bit from the depths. While this was a welcome turn of events, it was also recognized by many that this couldn't be a one-time action, that it needed to be bolstered annually in order to keep the state's teacher pay relatively attractive as well as competitive with surrounding states. So I have two sides to this. So on the one side, I've talked before how pay in South Dakota is very low, and it is shamefully low, particularly for people who are trained and have education. South Dakota, by far, overall, does not pay people well, and this is something that really needs to change. Now, in the case of teachers, and this can be viewed two ways, I did look it up, and from what I can tell, it's about $40,000 as starting pay for a teacher. So that's about the amount of pay that you can get. I was at a Walmart up on the north side of Sioux Falls recently, and I saw they had a sign there that was saying that overnight stockers get $20 an hour starting. So you can start working at Walmart with no college degree, get $20 an hour, and that's about the same pay that you'll be getting as an educated teacher in the state of South Dakota. Now, that's not great. I think that goes more towards the idea of how entry-level work, those wages are rising, but we're not keeping up with more educated work of our white-collar jobs. But on the other hand, I get really tired of teachers complaining about the low pay. And I think a lot of these issues come from the fact that the teachers have generally not spent much time in the private sector. Typically, you see people become teachers and then they move into the private sector and have a for-profit job. It's not often you have people go and start in the private sector and then they'll go and become teachers. And I think what results from this is that teachers, one of the things they'll hear is that, oh, yes, we get all these days off, but we have to go and do work at home and do grading after hours and all these additional things and put in these additional time. And this is the same for a lot of other jobs. And the job I used to work at before I did this, it was a professional job, and there was the $40,000 a year. That was a middle-level management salary. And there was a lot of overtime that you would have to do. Again, you're not getting paid overtime for it. It's just stuff that you have to get done. You have on-call after hours, so you might be getting calls at midnight that you have to take. That was not unheard of. There was just a lot of additional work that you had to do. And that is just the way things are. I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying that this is great. I think Americans overall work too hard without being seen the correct amount of compensation for it. And I think the culture of how work is done in the United States has a lot to do with this, and it can greatly be improved. But that's a completely separate issue. The point I see is that it's frustrating to me when I hear people say that teachers aren't being paid enough, and I think this is why that's happening a lot of the times. Now, on the other hand, I also see that, look, I want to be able to have our schools be better. I want to have better schools, and in order to have better schools, yes, it's going to help for us to have better paid teachers. Again, if you're someone in Sioux Falls and you can look at what the Sioux Falls pays for teachers, and you can look across the borders into Iowa, Nebraska, or Minnesota and see, hey, looks like I can go get paid more. I can still be within driving distance from my family. Might as well go and do that. There's a lot of reasons why you might have people leaving the state, but this goes across the entire board. It's not just about teachers. Everybody needs to be being paid better. We need to have a culture of compensating our employees very well. And the more we can do this, the better it's going to be for everybody. The more people are going to have disposable income to spend in other areas, which is going to open up new business opportunities. It's going to open up which is going to in turn allow for other people to come in and set up businesses here that are going to bring in more skilled, more money. And it's going to make it a much better place to live. So the next story, and this one is from KFGO. Senators request assistance for livestock producers affected by drought. And what we have here, we continue to hear from producers who have been severely affected by drought this year and have incurred costs related to transporting their livestock to feed sources instead of hauling feed to their livestock. The senators wrote, under current regulations, these producers are not eligible for ELAP transportation assistance. We respectfully request that FSA exercise its authority to further improve ELAP by providing payments to producers for a portion of the cost they have incurred from transporting their livestock to feed sources. So, to give you an idea what's going on here, there is a drought. This has made the cost of feed for livestock to become more expensive, and there's two solutions. You can either bring feed from one place to your livestock, or you can bring the livestock from where they're at to feeding sources. And the ELAP is assistance that is available to livestock producers, where if they are bringing food from one place to provide it to their livestock, then they're able to get compensated for the cost of transporting that feed. However, if they decide to bring their livestock from where they're at to the feed source, they can't get compensated for that. Now, ultimately, I don't really care about those details about the issue, about which way it goes, but I just find it very frustrating that, again, we have a situation where we have private businesses. These are businesses that are making lots of money producing beef. And these businesses are having to, yes, they're taking on additional costs because of droughts, but that is what that industry is. And now we're having taxpayer dollars go to help these private businesses because of these droughts. Now, this does result in two things. This results in these livestock producers taking more risks that they probably shouldn't be taking because they believe that the federal government is out there to protect them in case they make a bad decision. And so this is going to just make a less stable economy. And it makes the livestock producers, in order to stay competitive, to have to rely on the federal government. And again, this is our tax dollars going and paying for this. Look, if you look at commodity markets, they have things called futures. Maybe you've heard of the futures markets. The whole idea of the futures markets is it's a way to help livestock producers be able to work around the variabilities that the industry inherently has. Not just livestock producers, but also farmers and other crops like that, things that depend on weather. And so we can have insurance in place. There are ways that the private industry is able to handle this. We don't need federal government coming in and paying private businesses just to be able to move feed. Like, this is an expense that you're going to incur. And yes, I realize that this means that there's going to be higher prices at the grocery store for steak. Well, there already is higher prices. Okay, so it's all about this federal intervention that keeps changing prices and taking my money, putting in places that I don't want to happen. And I am just sick and tired of this. Look, if you want to have a business, make it run. Like, why should, like, I used to, again, work in property management. Look, you're going to have bad years. Crazy things happen for investors. But the federal government isn't stepping in and helping those people because it's all about where the lobbyists are and how they're connected to politicians. And this is the problem that we have with the federal government. The entire thing is about taking my money and then figuring out who they can give it to because those people are giving them money to keep them in power. And this is just, I've had enough of it. And I am so tired of it. Okay, so next story. Boozman Colton joined bill to thwart Biden administration's plan to give illegal immigration taxpayer-funded payments. All right, this is one where if you have not heard about this, this should really upset you. Let me read this quoted text here. It would be unthinkable to pay damages to a burglar who broke into your home for the psychological trauma they endured during the crime, said Cotton. And yet, the Biden administration wants to reward migrants who illegally entered our country with up to $450,000 each for just that reason. The Biden administration's promises of citizenship and entitlement programs have already caused the worst border crisis in history. A huge cash reward will make it even worse. This is the height of insanity. So for those who don't know, during the Trump administration, this was big news out there. So if you pay attention to news, you probably heard about this. But during the Trump administration, you had all these migrants coming up from the southern border, crossing in. And one of the things that they're doing is they're taking children and taking away from the people who are claiming to be their parents. Now, a lot of people on the left were saying that this was a racist policy designed to be discriminatory against these Latin Americans coming up into the U.S. The real reality of it was that there were smugglers, people smuggling children and trying to use children as cover or selling children and using it as human trafficking. And this was measures there to be able to stop human traffickers by taking the children away and saying, yes, we want to make sure that these kids are actually the kids of the people who are claiming to be their parents and they aren't being smuggled into the country illegally. Or I shouldn't say smuggled into the country illegally because all of these were being smuggled into the country illegally, but smuggled into the country to be used for some other illegal purposes. The things that were happening to these kids are horrifying. Not from the Americans, but the things that were happening to these kids that were being smuggled, these kids that were being trafficked. It is horrifying what was happening to them. And so, yes, the Border Patrol was doing things in order to make sure that the kids were safe and that they were not being taken advantage of by these other people who are coming up across the border. Well, now the Biden administration is coming through, and they're saying that these families and these kids that were separated, that they received psychological trauma, and that they need to be compensated for this. And they're planning on giving them $450,000 apiece to compensate for the psychological trauma as I believe it was a settlement that was reached. Now, this is incredibly upsetting. We're talking at almost $500,000 for people who illegally crossed into the country. And everything that was happening on this side of the border, it was done legally and it was done to protect people. And now Biden wants to go and give $500,000 to, or just under $500,000, $450,000 to these families and to these individuals. This is insanity. I completely agree with that. Now, one of the people who signed on to this was John Thune, so I'm happy to see that John Thune is signing on to this, saying that we need to stop this from happening, because the only thing this is going to be resulting in is more people coming up from the border, because look at this, you can get nearly $500,000 by smuggling a child into the United States and getting caught with it. Like, this is just the worst possible use I can think of. Okay, maybe not the worst, among the worst possible uses of taxpayer dollars. And it is aggravating. It is so irritating and upsetting that this is happening and that people are supporting this. That, again, you can take people's money from across the country and give it to people who illegally entered the country. And I've gone through the immigration system with my wife. My wife, she wasn't born here. We had to go through the immigration system. It is an awful system. Okay, the whole thing is destroyed. I get that. But this is no excuse This is no excuse to having people come up from the southern border and then just start paying them insane amount of money, enough money to go buy a nice house in most places. This is a horrible thing that the Biden administration is trying to make happen, and the fact that they're doing it through the courts, as a way to be able to work around the will of the people, is just makes it all the more just filthy and gross that this is being allowed to happen. And so I'm not always happy with the things that Thune and Rounds do, but I gotta say, at the very least, signing on, co-sponsoring this bill, I appreciate them doing that, and this is something that I gotta give them credit for. But again, the fact that we even have to have that discussion is insane. All right, the next story we have here: lawmakers reach a deal on spending bill, but hurdles remain. So this is a fairly long article, and I have a bunch of different copied portions here. I thought there was going to be commentary here from John Thune, since he's the minority whip in the Senate. However, there wasn't any. But there were two big quotes here. And basically, the whole discussion of this article, they're talking about how they are coming close to an agreement on a spending bill, and they're really concerned about shutting down the U.S. government for the weekend. So we're talking about shutting down the government for a couple days. Now, for those who don't remember the past times we've shut down the government, nothing goes bad. The only things, the worst things, are things that are deliberately happened there in order to go and try and punish the American people for allowing the government to be shut down. But that's a completely different discussion. I'd be happy to just shut down the government forever. That would be a great thing for me. So yes, if we can even get a couple days, that's fine by me. But here's some quotes that we have from, these are from GOP senators, so from Republican senators. So it's a quote: "One of the things I'm a little concerned about is why we want ourselves the object of public attention by creating the spectator of, creating the spectator of government shutdown," said Texas Senator John Cornyn, John Cornyn, GOP leader. So here again, we have a Republican senator who's one of the leaders of the Senate, and saying that he doesn't want to go, and he wants to bend on these issues because he's just afraid of being the center of attention about this issue. Because early on, I'll read this also from, this is a quote from Chuck Schumer. Let's see. I'll just read this part. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said Democrats are prepared to support the bill, adding it was not easy to reach this deal. He said most Republicans do not want a shutdown, but, quote, "a few individual Republican senators appear determined to derail this important legislation because of their opposition to the president's life-saving vaccine guidelines. Let's be clear. If there is a shutdown, it will be a Republican anti-vaccine shutdown," said Schumer. Now, again, I don't like Republicans. I don't like the Democrats. But yes, if it's an anti-vaccine shutdown, I am all for that. Shut it down. Okay, this sounds like a great argument. Like he's trying to make this as a bad thing. Personally, I look at this and say, no, this is exactly what should be happening. And so then we have the GOP senators coming out and saying that they're concerned about this because they don't want to stand up against the vaccine mandates. That is exactly what the American people want. The American people want you to stand up against the vaccine mandates. The American people don't care if the federal government gets shut down. And then finally, we have a quote here, and this is from Mitt Romney, a senator out of Utah. But among most of Republican senators, I'll read the whole thing here. But among most other Republican senators, enthusiasm for shutdown is running thin. Quote, "There's too much chaos in our country right now, too much concern about the Omicron. The last thing we need is more confusion and fear," said Senator Mitt Romney, Republican of Utah. So again, here's a Republican, a neocon, and the strongest sense of the word, who doesn't want to stand up for what the American people actually want because he's afraid that there's going to be more fear, more confusion. Look, all of this is coming from Washington and coming from the mainstream media that's creating all this confusion. And what we need are strong leaders to stand up and say, no, I'm going to defend the American people. I'm going to defend what I was put in this office to do, and I'm not going to crumple to the whims of our current administration. Yes, senators, stand up Find a spine. Your job is to make sure you're doing what the American people want. And by and large, the American people don't want to be told what to do. They don't want to be forced to go and get vaccinated. Now, if you want to be vaccinated, by all means, that is your choice. But to be forced into that decision is wrong. And I wish we had more Republicans standing up. And even the fact that we don't have a quote here from John Thune or Mike Rounds saying that they're going to defend Americans and that they're going to defend the right to not be forced to take a vaccine is shameful. It is absolutely shameful. All right, I think this is the last story that we have here. Yep, this is the last one. South Dakota legislature's workforce housing needs committee plans to bills for 2022 legislative session. Concerns for developing lots, land to build units on, or to create places to put living units on, infrastructure is a part of all of that, Chase testified. Whether it was water, sewer, or streets, many communities are struggling with this topic. So what you will see between now and the beginning of session is an infrastructure development plan. So the whole point of this article, and again, this one is from blackhillsfox.com. So the whole point of this article was that we have a shortage of affordable housing in the state of South Dakota. And they gave examples of some people who are spending 60% of their income on housing expenses. Now, South Dakota, sure, let's try and provide more affordable housing. Their solution to this is saying that, no, we need to have the government take more money, take more taxpayer dollars, and build up infrastructure. Now, yes, infrastructure is a very important thing. And again, I would prefer to not have any government there. But if government is going to spend money on something, I'd rather they spend it on infrastructure as opposed to something else, because there's value to that. But here's a problem that we have is the way that our cities are built is they're built on Ponzi schemes. They're not able to support themselves, and it's due to all the regulations that are in place that make us have these communities that are too expensive to maintain. It's too expensive to maintain this infrastructure. And the only way that we're able to keep up with it is by borrowing more money and by constantly just borrowing more money to go and fix up the previous issues that we have with the breaking down infrastructure. What we need is to reduce the regulations, reduce the zoning laws, make these it so we can have different kinds of housing options. This is just another case where it's a matter of let's go and spend more taxpayer dollars on more of these big, massive projects, and it's going to be a big payday for a lot of people who are out there running these companies, and more money, the taxpayer dollars, ultimately going to these private companies so they can go and do these infrastructure projects. Again, it's probably one of the better things that you can spend money on, building out roads and those kind of things, but it's not something I still want people paying for. We need to be making sure that when we build our towns, we're able to build them out better. There is a book, I believe it's called Strong Towns, which goes into a lot of this and a lot of how the way Americans are building cities is doomed to fail, and it is a massive Ponzi scheme. And this includes South Dakota and Sioux Falls and all these cities that the amount of issues that we're going to have with maintaining our infrastructure exceeds the amount of money we're bringing in property taxes, and it is just not sustainable. And we need to be looking at better ways of building towns that are sustainable. And I don't mean sustainable from this idea of using, green technologies and stuff. I mean sustainable financially, sustainable from being able to maintain the ways that these houses and these roads and all the infrastructure that goes into it are able to be maintained with the tax dollars that we're able to collect. And there's a lot of ways we can do that, but we just need to have actually people care about that. So that's the last story. Thank you so much for watching. My name is RJ. This is The People Have Spoken. Have a great day.